Gameboy Advance AGB 001 IPS Screen Mod. G'day guys, welcome to today's video where we'll be exchanging this stock screen for an IPS replacement. Firing up the unit here, you can see exactly what to expect from the screen in terms of its brightness and sharpness. The screen cover is really well used and scratched there, you can see, but there's no way to turn it into this without this mod. So here we are, the mod's completed. Thanks for watching the video. That's all there is to it. No, look, let's go through the process of installing this mod. But looking here at the finished product, I really think these mods are worth doing. I think they're absolutely fantastic finished results, and a little bit of fun using a different reproduction case other than the classic blue that this one was originally in. Went for a DMG01 style case for this GBA. Showed you there the parts that the seller has sent me, and we'll start by tinning some cables that we'll be attaching to the board internally. When I looked at this initially, and this is the first mistake up already, there was a pad for ground, and I thought the seller had screwed me by only sending 3 cables. So my green cable there was for ground, which of course I work out when I'm looking at the board later that it's not required. You know, it's a handheld device. But look, I'm not going to edit out my mistakes. I'll keep them in. And in fact, while there was some testing before this unit was completed, there was also a few mistakes along the way, which I'm happy to leave in. That sometimes it's a process with these mods, sometimes it's an error in judgment or assumption, like with this mistake here. But I was listening to a really great Tech Moan video, and at the start of his video, he summed it up absolutely perfectly to how I see my own skill level in this hobby. You know, I'm not educated or trained professionally in any way. It's every single time I do a process like this, it's a learning experience. So if I was to go back and do a mod which I've done before, I'd be faster, I'd be more efficient, I'd, skip, doing things that I don't need to do. But it's the process of learning, and whilst we're all at different levels, some people will have learnt all the common mistakes and avoid things that I get wrong. Other people might look at this and go, well, it's a process which can be undertaken and I can learn from. And if the result is worthwhile to you, then I'm all for it. And to me, even off the back of a few failed projects, the experience of learning and trying is worth it. And if it's something that brings you joy at the end, with something that you have a real connection to from your childhood toys, then again, more power. Typical Nintendo, starting with some of those tri-screws that they love so much, and one Phillips head in the battery compartment, oddly. The 6 tri-screws holding the back case on. We open this unit up, detaching the ribbon cable already at the top, which holds the stock screen in. There's 2 Phillips head screws holding the board in, just to mix things up. Now, this unit was functional. All the buttons worked on it, but it was real grimy and not crunchy, but the way the buttons are pressed. You see the pads there are not, overtly filthy or anything, but man, this unit must have had a hard life. Honestly, I don't know what the original owner did to it, but it was a prime candidate that, sure, we could clean the case as best we could, but my objective was just a little bit of fun, which is why I chose a case which was a reproduction one that wasn't even an original release. So I don't have any serious, I suppose, perspective on making this as new. I want to have a little bit of fun with this mod. So we've freed the board, we've taken it out of the housing, and I don't need to cut the original case, which you do need to do with these to accept a new screen. It's just a little bit of clipping and things like that, but getting a repro case knows what it's going to be accepting, and just in putting in here the adhesive. Now, the seller had, obviously gone ahead and had templates made for these adhesive 3M stickers, but it was improperly cut, which was a real pain and caused a little bit of headaches later on. Just showing you here, this point TP2 on the board is one of the points that we'll be soldering to. On the other side of the board, the two shoulder buttons, SW2 and I think SW3 from memory. Can't quite see it on the board there. Are the shoulder buttons to adjust the screen brightness. I think maybe it's a battery concern that you'd want the brightness. You see me work out there that I don't need my ground cable and taking it off. What I'll do is I'll just put a little bit of solder onto the pad. It is relatively small. It's certainly not the smallest out there, but as we're getting into this generation of handheld console, things are getting a lot smaller than they are in previous ones, and more complicated. But if you take your time with it and you go, task by task, it can be worked out. You see me there, probably do mistake number 2. The angle in which I solder the wires to meant that closing the case, the wires were coming up out of the case. So I actually later on just undo that. At this point, with the new ribbon cable for the new screen attached to the board, I decided to do a test fit. The bit of a pain about this one was it encouraged you to do a test fit, but the instructions were not for this generation, I'd say, of mod. Things get refined and changed, and it's clear to me that this is a newer ribbon style. There wasn't a requirement like the instructions had for folding the ribbon cable, but it still wasn't as intuitive to me. There's our little Lego style connector that's familiar from a lot of devices at this point with those types of screens, like mobile phones. That I found very tricky as well. A lot of force required. Speaking of failed projects that I mentioned earlier, I did recently rip a ribbon cable. You see me mistake number 3, inserting the batteries in the wrong orientation, which I continually do. In a failed project, I ripped a ribbon cable, and it was a tough lesson to learn that you really, really want your patience. And I tried to do this with this mod, is to really, really take my time. Still pretty elated for a test fit to see the new screen fire up like that was pretty cool. Coming back to the new shell housing, this miscut adhesive, I spent some time trying to shave it down, and the lesson learnt here, and the thing that I would bear in mind in the future, is while I really took my time there and I cut it out accurately, when you press the screen in, the adhesive will push down as well and becomes visible. So once the screen was in, I had to really, really carefully, because I didn't want to damage these screens. I'd seen some reviews that these screens had been damaged on installs. So again, patience was the key. Take my time to take that adhesive out from around the edge, because it's not covered by the screen cover at the end. But if I were to do it again, I'd probably aim, maybe 0.5 millimeter inward on an angle, cutting that adhesive back, so when the screen is pushed in, it doesn't push the adhesive out to be visible. Having not taken one of these GBAs apart as well, you get to know the best ways to assemble and disassemble, and what gets in the way. And it's a learning process. If it's a DMG01, which I've taken apart a lot of times and done IPS cases, mods and fresh cases too, it's a piece of cake because it's bigger, but it's also easier because I've done it before. So taking off the film from the front is a requirement before we seat it into the new case. But, you know, obviously being at this point in the video, I know that I'm going to be working with this for a fair amount of time, and I want to avoid putting my fingerprints all over that screen before I put the screen cover onto it, being that that's the last thing I want to do. But not quite possible. Did get my fingerprints on it, and that meant, you know, really taking my time cleaning the screen and the screen cover before everything's in its final place. But we are really, I suppose, approaching a test fit at this point to see if we can get things working before closing all the housing up together. We know that the unit's not faulty in any way, but what took nutting out at this point was understanding exactly how those ribbon cables were going to come together. Again, I want to be extremely careful with these ribbon cables being gun shy from having one have the tiniest tear and be the failure of a project. So really taking my time. Looking at this point, I suppose I've worked out one of my errors in that the cables to the shoulder buttons are coming out from the top. Mistake number 4, I've got my pad in there, which is the insulating layer rather between the screen and the board, but its purpose is to go between the ribbon cable and the board. So as I fluff about with the with my little cables that were going to become quite difficult, and I think maybe I give it a go before I just change. I unsolder them and solder them back into a more appropriate angle. At this point, I don't realize that the ribbon cable will short the board and won't work. So I get all the fun of assembling it and then it not working. You see me there as well, mistake number 5. I'm putting the Phillips head screw into the wrong place, which meant that it didn't seat properly. So from this point forward for a little while, everything is wasted effort because it was never going to reassemble properly. I think as well, knowing a mod like this, and perhaps I could have taped down the cables as well at a more appropriate angle and worked out which way they were going to run. In fact, I would, redoing this mod, do that. I would work out how they would run, knowing where those cables can come up and around the case. But again, I didn't want to take this project overly seriously. I just wanted to have some fun with it. I wanted to do it for the first time and work out which kit was great. There we go. I've worked out that the angle is not the best. At this point, I've still got no idea that that ribbon cable is going to short the board, which frustrates me watching it back. Just getting the angle on this little cable was really difficult, actually. So I opted to try and use some tweezers because I didn't particularly feel like burning my fingertips either. But my soldering iron's set quite low in temperature. I don't want to heat the little wire up too much and melt the really thin. I wonder how thin that cable wire that wire cover it really is. So just there at the top left, one screw down, you see that I have a screw already in through the board and I don't realize it. I also didn't realize, I suppose, a part of the learning experience with these GBA cases are that these screws are quite long, but they require a lot of screwing in to seat properly. So it feels like the case is miles apart, using the back end of my blade to push in those cables, and going quite slowly, but it will pull the case together. Will the screws? I think I just worked it out there that, yep, time to undo it all. You know, so even down to those little things, maybe they're hard to express, but a little bit of experience goes a long way. You know, I would be really confident that I'd be able to do this mod in, 30% of the time that this took me this go around. But at this point, I'm still really pleased to say that you saw the finished result already. Just reseated that ribbon cable. Not quite working out what it is yet. Um, Seeing that finished result to me and working towards that is certainly the goal. And if I was to revisit um, retro games, I would prefer to be doing it on a screen which is better. I want to play my games on original hardware. I don't mind if it's being played from a ROM and the hardware doesn't know what the story is. I noticed a few fingerprints while I was trying to get my hands off of it. And hey, look, let me give you a piece of advice at this point as well. I've been working on this for maybe over an hour, say, and it was working, and it took a lot of nutting out, and I wasn't quite sure how it was to go together, and then we finally start assembling it, um, and it didn't work. And there's a moment in time where you go, ah, geez, have I broken this, or is it faulty? So I double check my connection there on the little Lego. I reseat it up here. I think maybe I do a test run outside again. You get a feeling of dread that you've stuffed up. And look, it does happen. Mistakes do happen, and you can only learn from it ultimately. But if you again stay task focused and one task at a time, what's in front of me, if it's troubleshooting and you have the patience for it, I really think there's a high likelihood that you'll be able to work through what you're stuck on. If you've made it to this point in the video, I'm sure you've worked out this is a far more relaxed approach for me, but I do apologize that, especially at this point, you can't see my troubleshooting off camera, fluffing about whether I managed to get this working off screen or not. But taking it out of the housing was definitely helpful. There we go. I worked it out. That's where that goes. Don't forget it. In between the ribbon cable and the screen, and the motherboard rather. That's the confusing part about the instructions on this, is it said, ribbon cable and screen, but it's actually ribbon cable and board. Not sure if you noticed as well. One thing I always appreciate about Nintendo, the way their housing and buttons come together. They ensure that each button is going into its corresponding place and prevents. I think it was a little while ago I was putting together a PlayStation 1 controller, and the square and circle buttons, for instance, can be interchanged, I believe. Which is a nice little attention to detail thing. I think even this is an interesting generation for Nintendo as things are getting miniaturized, more features are going in. But even going back to the original Game Boy, there's always been a high level of attention to detail from Nintendo, which I really appreciate. As a kid, I never really had a Nintendo console, but yay, test it turned on. That's good. But now taking these consoles apart, I really do appreciate the attention to detail that goes into them, and even these reproduction cases, which obviously aren't made by Nintendo, but the reproduction cases still honor that attention to detail, and I really do enjoy it. I think I just worked out there that I've got one too many screws, and I'm taking it apart again. Thinking, because one of the extra screws is a Phillips head, that I must have only, when I reassembled, put one of the two Phillips heads onto the board, and watch my confusion here as I work out that the two Phillips heads are in fact there, and that extra Phillips head must have come from the original case, because I did opt to use all new parts on this. So everything from the buttons to the case and the screws and the battery compartment, all those sorts of things are all new. All we're really keeping is the board itself, but it brings up that old philosophical question: if a ship is being replaced over time to the point where every part is replaced. Is it still the same ship? But I'd consider this still an original Game Boy, just with a really complete screen mod and housing. So I think this would be the last time putting it together, whacking in Pokemon Sapphire to make sure it fires up. Look at those screen fingerprints on the screen. Well, I noticed a little bit of that glue. I think actually what I was doing there wasn't just all gung-ho about putting the screen cover over the screen. I wanted to see whether you would still see those little tiny bits of glue, which maybe, again, I wasn't 100% successful in getting rid of, but having a different approach, I think, would be more successful. The better approach, while it was frustrating that I think I've taken this housing apart 3 times, the better approach is to test fit. The better approach is to take your time, cut very, very slowly, measure 3 times, double check where you're soldering onto the board. If it's pins, count 3 times, make sure you know exactly where you're going, rather than making more problems down the line. Just putting our finishing touches on now. I think the screen cover and the style are really cool, even if you don't. We'll take a quick look back on how this unit looked and performed beforehand, and then finish on some cool hero shots. Thanks for watching the video today. I hope you enjoyed it. Please like, subscribe, and share the channel. We'll see you in the next video.